It's never too early to get the drop on your enemies, so let's take a look at the opposition this upcoming season. Where are their perceived strengths and weaknesses? And how does that relate to Texas's success? Paul Wadlington, all things football analyst at Inside Texas, is on to break down the Texas schedule and what we can expect. Day or night, mid-season or off-season, Inside Texas never stops dropping content on the daily. Subscribe to InsideTexas.com today. Link in the description. This is going to be an interesting final year in the Big 12. Let's check out the first half of the season in Part 1, with Part 2 soon to follow. Without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome back, Paul. And first, what's the quick overview of how you're feeling about Texas this year personnel-wise? What's the bird's eye view early on?
I feel great about Texas in 2023. And from a macro perspective, every single position group except one is going to be better. And then there's one position group that'll be about a push. That's the defensive line. The position group, of course, that's going to be not quite as talented as last year's running back. Texas loses Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. You can't just shake off those kind of losses. Those are two NFL running backs. As for the rest of the Longhorn team, every position's better. Everyone's going to get better. This is a great opportunity for Quinn Ewers to grow as a quarterback in year two. If the very worst should happen, God forbid, Malik Murphy had a very strong spring game and showed why Steve Sarkisian has been so high on him. The Texas offensive line returns pretty much everyone and is going to be significantly better. And they're, a bunch of guys who are freshmen and sophomores are going to be growing up, and you'll see that in their play. And then finally, wide receiver. Some key transfers came in. Xavier Worthy is healthy. Texas has three legitimate threats outside, and that's not even counting Isaiah Nayor, who, according to some inside sources, is coming back and looking pretty darn good. You got Jatavian Sanders, first team All-Big Conference tight end, returning. And then on defense, you have what will be the deepest group of defensive backs since 2009, and that was an elite group. I'm not sure I'd put this group on that high a pedestal as that unit, but in terms of depth, they can hang with anybody in the country. They've got multiple options: Jahdae Barron, Ryan Watts, Gavin Holmes, Terrence Brooks, all at cornerback and nickel. And then you've got safety options. Even if Jalen Catalon can't come back full speed and give Texas 12 starts as an elite All-American level like talent, the transfer from Arkansas, even without him, Texas is going to have pretty good safety play simply because of Jaron Thompson and some other key guys. So, and of course, I'm leaving out Jalen Ford, who's going to be the returning first team All Big 12 linebacker, led Texas in tackles, had 4 interceptions. He's back. You've got this X factor of Anthony Hill, who proved to be a revelation in the spring game as a blitzer. All in all, Texas looks really good, really stacked, much more experienced. And I think year 3 for Texas is going to be very, very promising.
I agree, man. Now let's look at the field. We aren't going to cover Rice or Wyoming, so the marquee early season game is the rematch versus Alabama and Tuscaloosa, and they're sitting at an over-under of 10.5 wins this season. With all the questions Bama still has to answer, do you like them over 10.5 or do they fall short?
So the Alabama Crimson Tide, what a tribute to the program that when people think that they've taken a step back, they lost 10 guys to the NFL draft. They lost their quarterback, Bryce Young. They showed some, dare I say, weakness at times last year. And people still have them at 10.5, which shows the respect for the program, which shows the respect from Vegas. I actually have them under. I don't think they're going to be considerably under, partly because the SEC West is going to be a little bit down, a little bit more favorable for them. But they did lose a lot. They lost some key guys. And I think for the first time in a while, they've got some real questions and concerns at quarterback. Paired with that, they've got a new offensive coordinator. And while Alabama has typically had great offensive coordinators, and there's still Alabama Crimson Tide fans who wax poetic and nostalgic for Steve Sarkisian, Tommy Rees comes from Notre Dame. And I think there's some questions to be answered about Mr. Rees. He was considered a little bit conservative at Notre Dame. That might have been a function of some of the personnel he had to work with. But what we know about Alabama is that Nick Saban was not happy with the quarterback position after the spring game. Jalen Milroe threw 2 interceptions in that game. He didn't look very good or particularly fluid. He did run the ball well, and we all know about his athleticism. And the proof that Saban was insecure about the quarterback position is they brought in Tyler Buchner, and he's reuniting with his old offensive coordinator from Notre Dame, Tommy Rees. As for Tyler Buchner, we're not sure if he's the solution. Like Milroe, he's also mobile, not quite as good a runner. But the interesting thing about Buchner is he basically lost the job at Notre Dame to Sam Hartman, the transfer from Wake Forest. And he's also, his last performance for Notre Dame was throwing 2 pick-sixes in a bowl game against South Carolina. Alabama is probably in the worst position quarterback-wise that we've seen in quite some time. But I do think the Texas fans who are overstating that are sleeping on the fact that these people mint 5 stars like they're $1 bills. There's more 5 stars on the Alabama roster than anyone else in the country except maybe Georgia. They're going to be loaded at plenty of other positions, and people say, oh, well, who are those guys? Who's it going to be? Well, the point is it's Alabama, and it's someone you've never heard of, and they've redshirted and sat for 3 years waiting for someone who went to the NFL to graduate. And when this person gets a chance to start for a year or two, they're going to go to the NFL. That's why Nick Saban is 194-27 as a head coach at Alabama. That's why they have 6 national titles. I'm predicting the under, but anyone sleeping on Alabama or thinking they're taking some dramatic dive, I think you're going to be sorely mistaken.
Can't wait for that night game in Tuscaloosa so we can get a preview of what the SEC is like. And then we open conference play at Baylor. And after a rocky season last year, they're predicted at an over-under of 7.5 wins, with them ranking 100th in returning production. Which side of the line do you fall on with the Bears?
Well, the Baylor Bears are coming back from a disappointing season. Dave Aranda obviously won the Big 12, going 12-2 in 2021. And sports writers being sports writers, despite the fact that Baylor lost 6 guys to the NFL draft, decided that because Baylor had won the title, they were the favorites to win the title again in 2022. Didn't quite work out that way for the Baylor Bears. They went 6-7. Remember this when we talk about TCU, Big 12 fans, because it's going to be pertinent and relevant. Sports writers, they haven't changed. The thing to know about Baylor is that this is a program somehow that is always on the upswing and the downswing somehow simultaneously. This is the Schrodinger's cat of college football programs. Listen to this statistic. Since 2015, the Bear win differential has varied by more than 6 wins per season. So what does that mean? Well, it means they have things in season results such as since 2015, 10-3, 7-6, 1-11, 7-6, 11-3, 2-7, 12-2, 6-7. That's a bipolar program. So if that streak continues in any meaningful way, I guess in 2023, Baylor will either go 3-9 or 10-2. So it's pretty difficult setting an over-under number for a program that schizophrenic. All joking aside, Dave Aranda was pretty frustrated with the last year. He completely retooled his defensive staff. He fired his defensive coordinator, Ron Roberts, also fired his safety coach, brought back a coach to serve both roles from Oregon. I think Aranda is going to take much more interest and have much greater oversight on the Bear defense in 2023. Ultimately, I don't think that's going to matter unless Blake Shapen takes significant strides at quarterback. There were times and moments where Shapen looked really good. He can be a very deft passer at times, but there are other times when he looked pretty shaky. And the entire Baylor offense really kind of sunk or swim based on Shapen's performance. The other thing that they need to do is replace their offensive line. That needs to be completely retooled. This is going to be a very interesting season for Baylor. And I think it's going to be a season where Dave Aranda really does need to show a little bit of a rebound because Bear fans, they're used to tumultuous ups and downs, as you know, but I think they're looking for a little more consistency in their program. And Dave Aranda and Blake Shapen better provide it. I think the 7.5 number is a proper number. You can flip a coin whether they win 7 or 8, but if you hold a gun to my head, I think I'm going to take the under.
I'm an Aranda believer, so I'm interested to see how the changes manifest this season for them. Then our first home game is against a renewed Kansas team, and they're second in the nation for returning production. With a healthy quarterback, do you like them over or under their projected 6.5 wins?
I am buying the Kansas Jayhawks. I think Lance Leipold did an amazing job last year in his second year at Kansas. They went 6-7. They lost a really close ball game in the bowl against Arkansas, 55-53. And that score was pretty indicative of how Kansas both won and lost their football games. Here's an interesting stat for you to give you an example of the kind of coaching job that Lance Leipold did in 2022. That 6 wins was more wins than their prior 3 years added and combined together. In fact, since 2010, the Kansas Jayhawks have been 23 and 118. That's about a 16% winning percentage. That's about 2 games a year. And that's not real good. The fact is, Kansas is bringing back almost everyone of consequence. They're returning 17 starters. 10 of those starters are on offense, to include both of their quarterbacks. That's Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean, who filled in capably for Daniels when Daniels went down with an injury. They're returning all 3 starting wide receivers. That's Grimm, Skinner, and Arnold. They're returning giant man-child tight end Mason Fairchild. And they're returning their running back, Devin Neal, who was over 1,000-yard rusher at over 6 yards a clip, a very underrated, very good runner. And they, of course, return their offensive coordinator, who has one of the most creative RPO-based offenses in college football. The Kansas Jayhawks are legitimately loaded on offense. Their problem, of course, is that they have to play defense. And they do have some carbon-based life forms over there. Leipold, to his credit, understood that he does need to work the transfer portal to address their issues, specifically against the run. Where Kansas really struggled is when they got big brothered by teams that were much, much tougher and stronger in the trenches. That was Texas, that was Oklahoma, that was Kansas State, and of course, that was Arkansas in the bowl game. All 4 of those teams effectively ran the ball at will against Kansas. Kansas specifically went out and tried to find some run pluggers, tried to find some guys who can create a little more durability and depth up front so they can hold up against the big boys. I can say this, and I'm not exaggerating, I think the Kansas Jayhawks have the second best group of skill players in the Big 12 behind the Texas Longhorns. I think if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, and even if he doesn't fully stay healthy, I think this is a very dangerous team. And I think road trips to Lawrence are going to be much, much more frightening, not just in basketball, but actually in football. The Kansas Jayhawks have a football team.
Yeah, I'm bullish on Kansas too. And then, of course, we got the Red River Shootout heading up to Dallas for an interesting matchup against OU in year 2 of the Venables' reign. They're middle of the pack in returning production, losing some guys to the NFL even after a bad year last season. And Vegas is high on them with 9.5 wins, and that's tied with Texas's over-under on wins. Do you think they make that leap or miss the mark?
OU at 9.5 wins is a very intriguing bet. On one hand, I don't think OU is going to be all that good. On the other hand, I've never seen a more favorable schedule in the history of Oklahoma football. It's kind of remarkable, and we'll touch on that a little bit. The one thing to think about is how high this program was at the beginning of the year and how quickly they fell. In fact, since 2000, Oklahoma has had double-digit wins 18 times. It's one of the most consistent programs in college football history over that period. They, at one point last year, they were number 6 in the country, 3-0 after a not particularly brutal non-conference schedule. And they went on to go 3-7 over their last 10 games, including a 3-6 mark in Big 12 play. And of course, we all know about the blowout at the hands of Texas and TCU, the fact that they lost to West Virginia, which was a pretty bad football team. Obviously, Brent Venables did not start off the way he wanted to at Oklahoma. This year, their conference schedule could not be better. They have the brutal non-conference slate of SMU, Tulsa, and Arkansas State. And then they get to skip out on Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State, 3 teams that they went 0-3 against last year, and they replaced them with the 3 newcomers to the Big 12. That's Central Florida, BYU, and of course, Cincinnati. So the upshot of OU's easy schedule, if you're a Texas fan, is Texas might get to beat them twice. Now, as far as the 9.5 win over under, as easy as that schedule is, I don't quite see it. I still think it's probably a 9-win team. I don't think they get over the hump. It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. However, I think they have too many vulnerabilities. I think they have a lot of eggs in a healthy Dillon Gabriel basket. And given the fact that they're replacing 4 offensive line starters, they really only have one proven wide receiver in Jaleel Farouk. And although they have a very promising young running back room that I like quite a bit, I'm not sure they're going to run the ball quite as effectively as they did last year. And any defense that can take away their play action game with Dillon Gabriel, I think they're going to have good success against the Sooner offense. And I don't think the Sooner defense, despite bringing in some good portal transfers like McCullough from Indiana, a defensive lineman from Wake Forest, I still don't think they have the size on the front or the team speed on the back end to hang with the elite offenses in the Big 12. I know a lot of Texas fans are looking forward to Texas, OU, and Dallas, as we do every year. But An even more interesting game might be when the Kansas Jayhawks host Oklahoma. I'm not sure Oklahoma can stop them. And if Kansas can get a few stops, that could be a very interesting upset. And the way that the Sooners underachieve that 9.5 win mark.
Yeah, man, that schedule is going to be a huge help to them. And next up, we have to travel to Big 12 newbie Houston, who lost their quarterback and best wide receiver with a total production ranking 82nd in the nation. Vegas has them at 4.5 wins. So, which side are you taking?
Texas and Houston, old Southwest Conference rivals, reunite. They haven't played since 2002 when Texas also traveled to Houston. And Houston wasn't able to provide 4,000 paid for Longhorn tickets because they tried to erect temporary bleachers made out of Lincoln logs. And didn't quite work out for Texas, created some hard feelings. Texas went on to win that game 41-11. And I think you're going to see a similar result. I don't think Houston's going to be very good, and I think they're going to have a rough adjustment in their first year in the Big 12. Now, last year they did go 8-5. They went 5-3 in the AAC, but their strength of schedule was in the 60s. They got absolutely smashed by Kansas. They lost to SMU by a basketball score, 77-63. They beat Rice by a touchdown after trailing for a good portion of the game. They lost to Tulane, which doesn't sound like a bad thing at all until you realize it was their third string quarterback. He'd never taken a snap, and he ended up throwing 3 passing touchdowns against the Cougs. Their bowl victory was a thoroughly unimpressive come from behind win over Louisiana Lafayette. So I think Houston, even when you factor in that they lost 4 players to the NFL draft, I think they're in for a rough start. They lost their quarterback, Clayton Tune, who threw 40 touchdowns last year and has been their starter for quite some time. And they lost their greatest offensive threat, Tank Dell, 1,400 yards receiving, 17 touchdowns. He was the man in the Cougar offense, and now he's in the NFL. Now, it's Houston. You're always going to have talent seep into that program almost as if by osmosis, simply by being located in the city of Houston. But the Cougars have lost 10 O-line to transfer since 2022, including 2 O-line starters in the spring. So I think they're going to be replacing folks at key skill positions. I think they're going to be shaky on the O-line. I don't think they have very good depth. And though I have a lot of respect for Dana Holgorsen as a pure play caller and as a guy who can create offense for a quarterback, I don't know if Donovan Smith, who has all the physical traits, necessarily has the mental traits to negotiate some of the challenges that he's going to face in the Big 12. Ultimately, I think the Houston Cougars are going to be doormats their first year in the conference. Whether they cover that 4.5 number, boy, they have a really easy non-con, and I think that's going to help them in that regard. But the fact is, I don't think Houston is going to do very well. If you want to bet that number, knock yourself out, flip a coin, whether they win 4 or whether they win 5. I don't think losing is, I don't think they're going to feel good about either result.
Good stuff, Paul. And that's going to be a wrap on part 1. And we're going to cover the remaining schedule on part 2 in the coming days. For now, please tell the viewers where they can read all your latest work.
Hey, if you want to check out my work, you can go to Inside Texas. That's a member of the On3 network. And Inside Texas is the premier Texas Longhorns and Big 12 football site that you'll find. There's a lot of great content. Whether you're a recruiting fanatic or someone who loves the analysis of the actual games, you're going to find everything you want and some more. Come on by Inside Texas. You won't regret it.
And that's a wrap on Paul Wadlington. Head over to Inside Texas and sign up today. Thanks for hanging out. Watch some more of my videos here. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you want to support quality Texas content. As always, hook on.